Welcome. You're listening to the Good Girls Don't podcast with Ashley Ray
and Verity Mansfield.
This is the podcast where we smash those rules that we've been taught to follow both as men and women and burn the damn rule book. We're tackling the big issues and the issues nobody wants to talk about, and we'll be fiercely feminist about it.
This podcast is about inspiration, education, compassion, and being the change that you need to see in this world. This podcast is for the trailblazers, the freedom fighters, and the soul igniters, and all the women just like you who are ready to break the good girl rules and be heard.
We acknowledge the traditional custodians of Australia and its First Nations people on which this podcast is produced and consumed. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging.
Get ready for the revolution. It's coming to you now. It's coming to you now. We're gonna sing it, revolution. And they'll never bring us down. No, they'll never bring us down.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Good Girls Don't podcast. I'm Ashley.
And Verity.
And today we've got a bit of a sensitive topic that we want to start a discussion about for all men, women, girls and boys, something that we feel that should be talked about in families, in friendship groups, but we just want to give a little bit of a heads up. It is a sensitive topic. Verity, what do we want to talk about?
Well, we're going to talk about victim blaming. And of course, like this comes in and it's tied into ideas of, domestic violence, rape, sexual assault. So if there is anyone who might be triggered by any of these conversations, you might not want to listen to this episode and join us for the next or one of our past episodes. But we just want to be really, really careful and make sure that we're actually looking after the best interests of our listeners by stating this. So what's been really interesting at the moment, like Ashley's in Melbourne and I'm in Perth, and at the moment we've just had the Claremont serial killing case head to court, and they've been talking in the media about the conversations that are coming up in the court case, and there's almost, if you go on the news, there's like an hour by hour update of what's being said. And I was talking to Ashley the other day and just saying, I think this is such an important conversation because these were 4 girls that went missing over a 3-year period. And it was way back in the 1990s that there were 4 girls that disappeared. They were alone. It was late at night. They'd been out drinking at bars and nightclubs with their friends. And, it really does sort of raise up this issue that happens in society, and especially because this is something that both Ashley and I have experienced, of victim blaming. And, why is it that there are so many unreported cases of domestic violence, of sexual abuse, of sexual harassment, and even, just physical assault as well, with men that are victims of these as well. It's not just about women being victims, but why are they not reported enough? Why do we not stand up and speak out? And what happens if we do stand up and speak out? What has happened, in the past when women and men have stood up and spoken out? And why it takes so much courage and so much guts because of this, the horrible, nature of victim blaming and what does happen. And also, interestingly enough, at the beginning of this year in Perth, there was a man that was arrested after it was something incredible, 17 young men had been sexually assaulted. And yet that never, the whole time that these young boys were being assaulted, and when I'm saying young boys, I'm talking about from 18 years to up to maybe mid or late 20s. So these young men, that were being assaulted, and so many of them were being assaulted and in the back of taxis. Why did this never make news over the last decade? But the Claremont serial killing, that made massive news by the time the second girl went missing, back in the 1990s. And these are both cases that have been, in the media and in the courts this year. And, it really does kind of show up again, this victim blaming and the shame that goes around I guess that goes on for the person, but for the victim of these crimes, and why it is so hard for us as a society to be able to stop this cycle of victim blaming and to be able to actually get the people who deserve justice.
Absolutely. And it's so insidious, this victim blaming, because it goes back to the good girl rules, which, it's always that we have to, we have to have the approval of our peers and men in particular. Let's take this right back to when we are young and we're told that if a boy is hurting you or annoying you, then he must like you. Or there's that whole treat him mean, keep him keen. These horrible things, and it starts young. That conditioning starts so young.
It does, but it's even more bigger than that. It's even old children. It's like we're taught that if you're a good girl, if you're a good boy, Santa will bring you presents. If you're a bad child, you'll get nothing. So we're constantly taught, from the very, very, very beginning, that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people, that good people get rewarded and that evil and bad people get punished. And even when you look into like movies and even, like the whole obsession at the moment with, the superheroes and Marvel characters and all things like that, we all want to see like good things happen to good people and, that the bad people get punished. We're obsessed with this idea. And there's a really amazing article by Sherry Hambry. She's a professor of psychology at Sewanee University. And, she wrote this whole article about the psychology behind victim blaming and why we are psychologically hardwired as a society to blame the victim.
Ooh, that sounds incredibly juicy to read. We might have to include that link in the show notes for everyone.
But we're so obsessed past judgment on whether things are good or bad, whether we're good or bad. So what happens when we're trained to be good and to try and be really good people and something bad happens to us? Whether it's domestic violence, sexual assault, sexual harassment, rape, physical assault, between, men, or physical assault between women. For the victim, they're always going to come up with, well, what did I do wrong? And you hear it so many times, even in terms of children. I've done a lot to do with marriage breakdowns and the ramifications on children and, relationship counseling after divorce and separation. And so much, this is such a massive emphasis on making sure that the child will not blame themselves for their parents' breakdown, because children will always blame themselves. They're, egocentric, where everything's about them, and they honestly believe that anything they do is because they've created it. And, so it really does come back again to supporting this argument that we're hardwired to blame, to blame the victim, that we all look at things, if something bad's happened to us, the first thing that most of the time it goes through our mind is, what did I do wrong?
Yes, and we do that.
Why am I being punished? Yesterday my daughter has gastro and she's vomited all over the floor. And the first thing out of my mouth was, why is God punishing me? And I said it as a joke, but it's still like such a classic example that we automatically go to, I must have done something wrong.
Yes. And my goodness, we need to talk about this in so much more depth. Oh my God. Okay. It's this was a really tricky topic. It's trying to figure out where to start with this, because it's such a big thing and it just is so insidious because it's there in everything. It is part of the patriarchy. It's part of the social fabric that we grow up in and live in and exist in every day. I wanted to ask you, Verity, when did you first encounter victim blaming? When have you ever had an experience of it where it just was like really in your face?
I think for me it was more of a personal experience where I was in my maybe early 20s, like that 19, 20-year-old range.
So full of beans.
And I'd been out, drinking with my girlfriends and some of their friends, and my father just was quite sick, and I can't remember whether he just passed away or was passing away. So I got quite emotional, and one of my dearest friends, girlfriends, one of her mates said, look, why don't I take you home? You're clearly upset. Let's go. We'll go get some food. I'll take you home. I'll make sure you're looked after. And my dear, gorgeous girlfriend was like, oh, he's such a saint. Like, yeah, he'll totally take care of you. Anyway, very quickly evolved into what we would define as date rape, where I ended up back at his house. We didn't have mobile phones back then. To anyone,
It's
I don't
back
know
in
how
the
many
dark
people
ages.
listening that you might remember when mobile phones possibly didn't even exist, and they weren't. You wasn't your God-given right to be born with a mobile phone in your hand. And I think it was the age where our parents had just kind of were getting them, especially if you were like a real estate agent or someone like that, where you had to be on call. You just moved on from the pager at that point. And so anyway, I was, in this guy's house that I didn't know, but he was friends with my best friends, so I trusted them. And, I had no idea where we were because we'd gotten a taxi and gone to their place. I'd been drinking, it was late out. I didn't have a mobile phone. I couldn't contact anyone. And all I could think was, when it came to the situation where I knew that he wanted something or expected something more of me than I was willing to give, that if I felt like I had to do it because I didn't know what else I was going to do. Like, what if they kicked me out? What if I was out on the street by myself? Like, I felt that I was in danger. And I guess as well, just that feeling of being a very insecure young girl at that time. And there's no conversation back then about consent or date rape. It wasn't something we talked about. And you know what? It still isn't something we talk about. And this is why we're having this conversation, because we should. And yeah, so I ended up in this situation, and I remember the next morning kind of waking up and I was like, I really want to go home. And he said, oh, well, the phone's in the hallway. That's when your phone actually was plugged into the wall, like
Wow.
all the time. When you had a landline.
I'm having flashbacks to my childhood now.
You might need to Google landline for anyone who doesn't know what a landline is. But yeah, so, he let me use the house phone. And I managed to call a taxi, and I went home, and I was, got home and I was in absolute tears. And when I got home, my best friend rang me and she was like, oh my God, like, what happened? And she was kind of like this, from this perspective of like wanting the gossip. And then I felt trapped completely because I didn't want to break her heart and tell her what had happened. I didn't want the guy to be seen as a bad person. And you know what, this is a guy as well who had a fiance who worked away. So, and this is one of those instances where this guy honestly would believe he was a great guy. But we allow males to get away with such shitty behavior. It's like they don't even acknowledge or know when they're committing shitty behavior. And this is the really fine line around date rape. Like if you put out mixed signals, if you're alone at night, if you've been drinking, if you've just happened to make a bad choice, if you didn't say no, if you were wearing something low cut or something skimpy, if you've slept with someone else, had a one night stand before, if you didn't fight back, that's a massive, massive one that's used against victims to shame them. Yeah, and to blame them for being victims. Were you flirting? What were you doing there? And, there's that other, horrific one as well that you do hear it. She didn't act like a rape victim afterwards. And it's like, well, how are you meant to? What standard of criteria, behavior-wise, is that where you have to act a specific way so that everyone knows that you've been raped? Like, it's crazy, but this is all the stuff that gets thrown at victims and gets discussed in newspapers, on social media, in, friendship circles, family circles, in courts, with lawyers, at the police station. Like, all of these things, these questions come into play, and it's absolutely disgusting because the focus becomes on it's the victim's fault.
Yeah,
and
it does.
There's no focus, or very, very little focus on the fault being the person who committed the crime, which is insane.
And that's often how a lot of perpetrators get away with it, to be honest, because the victim gets so beaten down by all of these horrible and insidious questions and finger pointing, that why on earth would they proceed with holding someone accountable when they are faced with that level of bombardment?
Yeah, exactly. And, even just at my age of being 18, 19, and just being very, very aware that I'd been a young girl out drinking at night, that I actually really didn't know the guy who'd offered to take me home and look after me because I was crying over my father who was about to die. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what on earth I was wearing. I probably would have had pants on, but I probably would have had a low cut top on. But all of those things were in my head. So I already knew as a female that I believed that just because I was a female, I was to blame. Like, it was my fault. I made the stupid decisions. I didn't think this through clearly enough. I'd been drinking. I must have given mixed messages. I didn't fight back. I didn't scream no. All of those things I was very, very aware of. And because I was so aware of them, I blamed myself.
Because there's that real stereotype out there as well of what a assault victim should be. And that plays into the whole idea as well of what an assault looks like. And it's a very, very narrow, when I say narrow, I mean it's incredibly specific in what it is. And this is what we're taught as children as well. So it's that bad things happen because someone jumps out from behind a building or out of a bush and surprises you, and they hold a knife, they hold a gun, and then you're assaulted, and you must be beaten and bloody and fit within this really, really narrow set of circumstances for anyone to really say, oh, you were brutalized, something really bad did happen to you, okay, we'll listen to you.
Yeah.
If you don't meet that criteria, people don't listen.
And I think that's a really dangerous thing, because as we know, most sexual assaults happen by someone that you know. Like, the statistics are horrific.
Yeah, exactly.
And this whole idea of stranger danger, we think that, only strangers are dangerous. And it's not. It's something ridiculous. Like, only 14% of sexual crimes are committed by a stranger.
It's a very low statistic, yeah.
We teach all our kids about stranger danger, but we do not teach them, about the other, 86%.
Yeah, which are usually committed by a family member or of that person's life in some way.
Yeah, that they already know them. But it is such a fascinating conversation, because I've even had a very dear friend of mine, and this is like in the last few years, who was experiencing domestic violence with a guy that she was dating. And I remember, getting this horrific phone call in the morning, and I had to go to work, and I, was texting her, making sure that she was okay. And, we'd been talking for a few hours, and then we headed into work, and I was obviously very visibly distraught. And when I walked into work, and a few people were like, oh, Verdi, like, are you okay? Like, what's been going on? And I said, oh my God, I've just found this out about a friend. And I'm not kidding. The first comment from a man, and it was a man. So the first person who made a comment happened to be a man, and they said, what is she doing with a guy like that? And instantly she was blamed. It was her fault. She should have known better. She should have been smarter. She should have had more self-worth. She should have had more self-awareness. And it goes on to that whole cycle again of victim blaming. And I think this is such a really important point and conversation that we really, really, really need to make, is that it is never your fault. And there is a tendency of women as well that, not only do they look at themselves and go, oh, what did I do wrong? But then we also want to justify the abuser's action. And that is very dangerous. And we go, I said the wrong thing. I looked at him the wrong way. I stayed out too late again. I raised my voice at him. I know I should have learned by now not to have done that. We start blaming ourselves for triggering off someone else's shitty behavior.
Yeah.
And it's so important, that we raise our girls. I'm a mother of two girls, and, that we raise our girls and we talk to them about these things. We have conversations and let them know that it is never, ever, ever their fault. And I had experiences as well when I was dating a guy who suffered with alcoholism, and not that he ever abused me at all, but the times when I had to call ambulances or call the police, and I often always got, "You look like a smart girl. What are you doing with a guy like this?" And you hear that all the time as well, that if you're dating someone who doesn't have healthy behaviors, then you're a stupid female. And again, it comes back to it's our fault, that
Yeah.
we're to blame, that we're doing something wrong.
It absolutely is. And it takes so much courage to even begin to examine the fact that maybe it's not your fault.
I think it's something...
it takes an enormous amount of strength to do that.
I think it's something that we need to change in society, this idea of victim blaming, and that the bad behavior belongs to the person who committed the bad behavior. The bad behavior doesn't belong to the victim.
Yes, this was something I had to examine. I was in therapy. I've been in and out of therapy for like ever, guys. I was in therapy years and years and years ago.
Everyone should be in therapy.
Everyone probably needs to be in therapy. And I had to examine this with my therapist because I was having real trouble reconciling what had happened to me. And I just my brain couldn't compute it because, at the time I had already been through so much. My brain was hardwired on, I have to survive right now. I'm in danger, that it was almost impossible at the time for me to go, oh, that wasn't my fault. Oh, this is something that people go to university and study and they know that it's not my fault.
Yeah.
And I had to have it explained to me almost every week for 9 months that something wasn't my fault. It took a really, really long time for me to have that program in my head stop running, and then to be able to do the work to put the responsibility back on the perpetrator.
Yeah.
And, building on from that, why not? Let's spill the beans. So years ago, I had a friend from TAFE who decided to do the wrong thing by me and hurt me. It was an attempted rape and he did assault me. And that went to court. And it only went to court because I went to the police and I said, I think something's happened to me, but I'm not sure. Can I just talk to someone about what's happened? And the whole process was kind of awesome because I didn't have to be that involved in it at the time. And the police were great. However, when it got to court, here's where the blaming started, because I didn't want to be there and I didn't need to be there. But I had the detective and the Office of Public Prosecutions calling me and saying, hey, we need to clarify some information with you. The defense is suggesting that you consented to have a threesome, or that you consented to do all these different things. And I said, absolutely not. Have you even read my statement? And there were all of these accusations about my behavior and what I was doing there. And there was no focus at all being thrown back on them about, well, it doesn't matter why she's there. Why did you behave like that? It doesn't matter what she did or did not consent to. She's saying that this was not okay.
Yeah. And the crazy thing as well, like if you were there for that and then weren't they also there for that? So therefore, doesn't that just neutralize the whole argument? Like it doesn't, it's always put on to try and discredit the victim, to try and make her look like a slut, to try and make her look like a whore, to try and make her look like she's easy, to try and make her look like she has no morals. And it's just ridiculous. Like we really need to stop, this whole, I guess, culture of victim blaming. And, it's so evident, I guess, as well in the sporting industry. God. Like if you live in Australia, every single person's heard of so many instances reported in the media where there has been rape or gang rape, by sporting teams or people like sports guys, in the rugby and in the football. And, these are guys who are earning like great money, who've got fame, you've got like great bodies, you know, they've got these women throwing themselves at them all the time, you know, they're considering themselves as winners and they're out drinking, and there's so many incidences that get reported, you know, of these gang rapes and assaults, and the focus always goes again back onto trying to discredit the girl. And
It
that's
always
just
does.
horrific. There is absolutely no excuse for bad behavior.
No, there's not. And we have to, you know, part of the point of this conversation is to, at least, you know, from my perspective, is that my wish for almost everybody out there listening is that we stop taking on perpetrators' behavior, because it is a self-perpetuating cycle that we pass on to everyone. It's a contagious cycle as well. It can spread, and we can reinforce it, or we can choose to not do that. But it takes a lot of courage to examine that and to not internalize someone else's bad behavior.
Yeah, we really need to start putting the responsibility back onto the people who commit the crime. You know, I mean, really as well. And, you know, I get it that, you know, men can be victims too. This is not like, let's just put that whole argument aside, because it can, this
is not a whataboutery argument.
Yeah. But, you know, we need to teach males and young boys that they are not entitled to women's bodies. That, you know, there is no excuse. Alcohol and drugs is never, ever an excuse for hurting another person, whether you're punching your mate or someone else's mate, or whether you're assaulting a female. It's never, ever an excuse. Oh, but I was drunk, I didn't really know what I was doing, is not going to stand up in court. It is not an excuse for bad behavior. And, you know, we really need to start teaching young boys to take responsibility for their behavior. And I know that some people are going to get very angry hearing that, but this is the problem in society that happens so, or far, far too often, is that we constantly put the message out there that men cannot control themselves, and that it's a female's issue as a collective group, because we constantly tell girls to cover up. We constantly tell girls to be careful and to have situational awareness. We're constantly being told not to walk home at night by ourselves. It's always put onto us to be afraid that every man out there is a possible perpetrator.
Oh my God,
and
yes.
That is horrific. And Ashley and I do not agree with that either.
I
And we are not
absolutely
saying that all men are rapists. We're actually arguing that actual point. Not all men are rapists, but society expects women to behave that way. They expect us to have such fear of our circumstances of women because we're weaker and men are stronger, that we have to be afraid of men. And, you know, if we can't take the responsibilities of society to teach boys to behave better, men to behave better, the only other option is to teach our girls to be afraid.
Yeah, and it's like a massive fear campaign. You know, it's, you know, I often think of it as like a metaphor for, I often look at it as like a, you know, to break it down even further, because it is such a widespread and such a huge thing, at least in Western culture, I look at it as like a scare campaign by political parties trying to freak people out about something, and it makes people scared and it gets them to vote in a particular way. And that's how I often think of it, and it is that hot button issue. We can't be blaming people for things that they haven't done. It takes a really long time often to unpack this stuff, because if you ever choose to, you know, stop taking other people's actions as your own, this is going to require some real deep, soul-wrenching, unpacking therapy stuff. You're going to need people to help you do this. But it's absolutely worth doing. That's my little 2 cents.
But it is. It's really something that's deep-seated in our society. And even this year, there was a prominent politician who made the comment that domestic violence is a woman's issue. And that is horrific. And if you listen to one of our early episodes, you'll hear a lot more about that. And the lady who was involved, who was that? That was...
Is it bad that I don't remember?
Oh, I can see her face. Holly Ann.
Holly Ann, that's who it was.
Yeah, Holly Ann's episode, where she did confront this politician, and she was like, "What about domestic violence?" And he said, and he is he in the cabinet at the moment?
Yeah, I don't know if I think he is. I don't think he's been removed.
Yeah. And he literally was like, domestic violence is a woman's issue. Don't bring this to me. Go speak to a woman about it. And that is coming from one of our politicians who is currently in power. And I think that is absolutely disgusting. And domestic violence is not a woman's issue, because women do not commit domestic violence against each other. It is men, the majority of men that commit domestic violence. And this is another statistic as well. If you want to talk about, domestic violence happens to men too, it does. And do you know what? It gets committed to men by way more men than it does women.
This is one of my big arguments is, a lot of guys sit there, and I've had this argument with even my partner, and he said, what about the men? And I said, yeah, okay, well, here's the statistics, because a lot of the violence, and this is a statistic, it's a generalization backed up by stats. A lot of our crime and a lot of the violence committed in Australia is by men, and it is gendered mostly against women. It's not women, generally speaking, who are doing all of the violence or a majority thereof. It's men committing horrible things against themselves, against others, and against women.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I've just did a bit of Googling and research. The politician we're talking about is a current federal member of Parliament for the Liberal Party. So he is currently a federal member of the Liberal Party, 2019, who made this comment that domestic violence is a woman's issue and not for men to deal with. But yeah, sorry, Ashley, to interrupt.
No, that's okay. Oh my God, I had such a good point to make and it's flown out of my head again. Oh my God. I need another coffee today.
That always happens though when we're having juicy conversations. There's so much going on.
I know. Oh, this is what it is. Okay, let's flash back to a couple of years ago. Remember when Me Too started happening?
Yeah, it was massive.
Let's think about what happened there, because we started to, even though Me Too was really empowering for a lot of women, that was also around the time when the Cosby case was coming into the public eye. And what did the media do to the victims? They were eviscerated in the media. They were treated terribly by the media. And a huge part of victim blaming comes down to how we report on these crimes and on things like this, and how we talk about victims and survivors, and how when, pick up your newspaper today and have a look at what's happening in the crime articles. When you read them, are they talking about the perpetrator and what led up to them committing said act or perpetrating whatever it is that they did, and trying to justify them? Or are they trying to humanize them? And how does that reflect on the victim? Are they spending more time talking about the victim and trying to make them look like they've come from a well-born family and background, or that they should have been smarter and known better, or somehow was their fault? Think about that stuff when you read those articles, because a lot of the time it's designed in a particular way to blame the victim and to make them look smaller, insignificant, and like they don't matter.
And at fault, yeah. And I think this is, like I said, one of these things that we need to do that we've just been discussing is starting to put the blame and responsibility back on the person who commits the act. And I do this in terms of, coaching and mentoring women. We always say that, you are only ever responsible for your words, your thoughts, and your actions. You can never, ever be responsible for someone else's words, for someone else's thoughts, and someone else's actions. And yet we seem to get that, at one level. And yet when it comes into things, at domestic violence, abuse and assault, it seems to go out the window. So, one of the main points, again, is starting to put the responsibility back onto the people who commit the behaviour, the bad behaviour in the first place.
Yeah, it's not your fault. And it doesn't matter.
It's never your fault. If you're the victim, it is never your fault.
I also want to point out that, it doesn't matter whether you think this was a big deal or a small deal. you know, maybe, oh, they
Still a
just grabbed,
deal.
they just grabbed my butt, or they just pinched my boob, or maybe it was something completely different. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter how big or small you think it is, it's still not your fault, and it's still not okay.
And it's still important. It's still important enough to, you know, speak to a friend about, to speak to a colleague about, to speak to, you know, a manager, to speak to your family, to speak to your partner. It's still, it's, you know, if you feel like your safety and even emotional safety, not always physical safety, but even your emotional safety has been jeopardized, that you have the right to speak up and speak to someone else about
Yeah.
it. And I think it's also important, again, and I know we've talked about this in a previous episode, is the idea about consent. We really need to be teaching consent in schools to all males and all females, and treating consent as an enthusiastic and sober yes. So if she's drunk, you can't take that as a yes, because alcohol's affected her, you know, perceptions. You know, it has to be sober, and it has to be enthusiastic. It can't be half-hearted, okay, or maybe, you know, and full on enthusiastic yes. Otherwise, it's not consent.
Hell yes. I so agree with that. Oh, and sorry, this is like my brain working. How often is there that perception? I don't know if you had this experience growing up, Verity, but like I grew up, like I was a teenager in the early 2000s, right? And okay, not in 2000. I was like 10 in the year 2000. But I grew up with all the American Pie movies coming out, and everyone, you know, those were the blockbusters for the teens, and all of those style movies coming out, and being taught from those movies and from other media that being the drunk girl at the party was the cool thing. That was how you got boys to like you. That's how you got popular. Yeah, and it's really damaging that we portray this stuff. Really, really damaging.
It really is. And I think, you know, we do really need to be careful about what our children are exposed to. And, you know, just even being able to, it's not like you can't let them watch anything on TV, but just, you know, if they're watching stuff, just having that awareness of what information are they actually being told? What are they subliminally, like what are the subliminal messages that they're actually picking up on? And just having those open discussions with them. And I see parents like seize up the minute that sex becomes a conversation. And yet, you know, there's other parents who, you know, sort of go, okay, maybe this is awkward, but they still push through the awkwardness and have the conversation with their kids, because information is power and education is power. Like if we don't have conversations with our kids, no matter how uncomfortable it is, and yeah, no one wants to sit down. I don't think there's a single individual that wants to happily sit down and have a joyous conversation about date rape with their teenage girls. And, you know, don't wait till they're 18. The minute they're heading into high school, they need to be understanding what happens at parties, because drugs, sex, and alcohol is definitely happening in our high schools.
Oh,
you know, you've got
God,
young
yes.
boys exposed to porn, I think, by 8 years old was the average age in Australia. We need to be having these conversations. And, you know, like no one's happy to have them. We're all awkward as hell to have them, but they're necessary. And I would rather forewarn my daughter than to send her blindly into a situation with no information, no awareness, no situational awareness, no self-awareness, and have something horrific happen to her.
I agree. We need to have these conversations with our kids. With, you know, I don't have children, but, you know, I've sat down and chatted to your girls, and I've chatted with my sisters about it as well. And they're roughly the same age group. So have them with your nieces, with your nephews, with your cousins, with your grandkids, whatever children are in your life that you can actually have these conversations with, please do. And I also want to say that
we have to do it with consent, obviously, from the parents. But even talking to the parents, just don't go up to random children and have conversations.
Yeah, don't just do that at your local school. It will be weird.
But, you know, like we have in our household, so I've got a couple of really great girlfriends that I trust absolutely wholeheartedly. And I've spoken to my girls in front of them, and we've had a very open conversation with all of us where I've said, okay, so you know that you can always go to, you know, such and such, and you can always go to, you know, this other person. I don't want to share names, but you know that you can trust these two women. If you can't speak to me about something, then you know that you can trust these two women. And I've had this conversation with those two women in front of me, with my daughters in front of me. So we all are on board. And I know that my girlfriends have been like, hell yes to my children. If there's anything you need, if you can't call your mum, if you're ever in trouble, like make sure that you can call and talk to me about it. And they've had the conversations with their kids with me as well, so that we know that we're setting our kids up with mentors. We're setting our kids up with options of safe adults they know they can rely upon and depend upon.
Hell yes. I want to add in as well that accepting that something was not your fault and all of that does not mean that you are obligated to go through a legal process with police or the court system. It doesn't mean that you are obligated to do that. That is a choice. It's something I've chosen to do before, and it worked for me, and that's how I was able to take back my identity and power and be able to get closure on something that happened many years ago. But it doesn't mean that it's for everyone, and you don't have to do that. But
yeah, like if I can just butt in, for instance, I didn't do that, and I'm fine with that. Like I've, done my own inner work. I've come to peace with things. Like I didn't need to go through a institutionalized system in order to get the peace or to get my empowerment back. So you do really have to do some soul searching for yourself if you have been in that position about, which path you want to take or how you want to heal from that. And this is one of the things, often the person that causes the wound, that is not your responsibility. Like the behavior that wounded you is not your responsibility, but healing is your responsibility. And however you choose to do that is up to you.
Abso-effing-lutely. Oh my God. I'm going to put that on a sticker and on a t-shirt. I know you hate stickers, Verity, but I'm going to, actually, no, it's magnets you hate.
Magnets
and mugs. I'm going to put it on a mug. I'm going to send like 20 of them to you.
I can't stand mismatched mugs.
You're going to hate my kitchen.
We've got two places. We've got the place above where the kettle is with all the tea and coffee and all the nice, beautifully, perfectly matched mugs there. And then the kids have their own little section on the other side of the kitchen where all their weird-ass, crazy mugs that don't match anything. Those crazy one-off ones with slogans and things on them, or puppy dogs with love hearts and whatever. They're kept separately.
Well done. You will hate my kitchen. I do not have matching mugs at all.
Another weird and wonderful fact about me. Yeah.
So, Verity, where can we go? We've got some phone numbers. Like if people want help, maybe some support, or maybe just to talk about something that may or may not be happening or have happened.
Yeah, totally. So for anyone who has experienced domestic violence or sexual assault, there's a brilliant hotline, 1-800-RESPECT. So it's 1-800-737-732. Also Lifeline, if there's issues that are going on, especially suicide prevention, Lifeline is probably the way to go, and their number is 13114. The men's referral service, if there are many men struggling out there who are listening to this, then whether they want to look at their behavior, maybe they have had something that they feel the victim for that they need to share, the men's referral service is 1-300-766-491. And the reason I mention as well, if they're that is because they also cater for men who have done something and they need to get that off their chest, or men who have been involved in domestic violence and they need to get that off their chest.
They work with victims and perpetrators.
They work for anything. Do you know what I mean? It's not, and I'm only saying this, I know this is going to get people upset, but we have to accept that the majority of crimes are committed by men, with domestic violence and sexual violence and physical assault against other men. They're all, majority, not all, but the majority of them are where the males are the perpetrators. So that is a really, really good line. If there are men out there who are struggling with something going on in their lives in whatever way, shape or form that surfaced, the men's referral service, 1300-766-491. And, there's other great hotlines out there as well. I don't have the numbers at hand on me, but, the Men's Line Australia, Kids Helpline, Relationships Australia as well also offer amazing support.
We should also just add in here to make sure our butts are covered here that if it's an emergency, you need to call 000.
Yeah, for police and ambulance. If you are in immediate danger, call 000. Another really important tip as well, if you are in Australia, I know this goes for Australia, I don't know outside of Australia. If you are in a position and you need to call 000, but you cannot speak, you tap your phone on a hard service. Call 000 and tap, 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 tap your phone on a hard service. It is a national accepted call for help. And they will say, yes, they will say, can you not speak? Tap, tap, tap your phone. And they are trained to deal with people who are in a position, like if you're, hiding in a wardrobe from someone, if there's burglars broken into your house, if you feel in danger, whatever's happened, if you've locked yourself in a bathroom, if you can't speak, if speaking gives you away and jeopardizes your safety, tap your phone on a hard surface.
Oh my God, I did not know that. That is genius.
It's amazing what actually is out there. But if we're not educated, how do we know that these things, that the 000 people understand these secret codes that go on?
I'm going to add one last thing in here for all of our listeners, which is this work is really worth it. When you dig into taking responsibility for your own healing and not for the other person's behavior, that work, and it is deep and it will have you on the floor crying many times, but it is so worth it on the other side.
Yeah, it really is. The empowerment and the strength that comes through on the other side is it is glorious on the other side. And it can be really hard. It can be really, really super hard to face up. But what happens on the other side is amazing. And you know what? I'm going to say this as well for men who have maybe suffered, anger management issues, who have committed acts of abuse and assault and domestic violence. When they come through the other side as well, they can really truly step into being great men. So if there are men listening out there who feel like, crap, feel that shame or guilt around their own behavior, get help, because and this is the thing, we need to get away from this concept of bad and good. Everyone has elements of bad and good within them. Some of us just commit more serious negative behaviors, unresourceful behaviors than other people, and it can have absolutely devastating impacts in their communities, families, friendships, everything. But yeah, whether you are a victim or whether you have caused someone else to be a victim, please, please, please seek help. And I hope that you just go back and check out those numbers. We'll put them in the podcast notes as well. And please just seek help. There's no shame in the people on the other end of the line. They do not sit there in any judgment whatsoever. They are specifically trained to be able to deal with all different aspects that come at them.
And you may find that you are not as alone as you may think you are.
Yes, and most of these, I don't want to say all the hotlines because I don't legally know, but a majority of these hotlines are, they all are free, by the way. They're private and I'm pretty sure most of them are confidential. And I think as well, it probably is, I've just found it, the Kids Helpline. If there are any young people listening to this between the ages of 5 and 25 years old in Australia, you can call the Kids Helpline, which is 1-800 551-800. And again, that one is definitely free. It's private and it is confidential. And it is for any young people between the ages of 5 and 25 in Australia.
I think that just about wraps up what we have to say, at least today, on this topic. What do you think?
Today.
I know. I think this is something we'll keep revisiting.
Yeah, something else will come up and we'll be like, oh, we should have spoken about this. I did read this article.
Exactly.
But it is a serious conversation, and please have this conversation with your loved ones, have this conversation with your partners. If you're parents, have this conversation with your children's other parents. What do you want to talk to your children about? Get on the same page. Talk about the importance. Try and put aside your own personal feelings about gender biases and not all men do this and not all women do this. You just got to put the bullshit aside. I'm just going to be really blunt there, because the statistics are statistics and they unfortunately don't look great for men, and that's just the way that it is. So please try and just put aside any biases and just talk to your children about, body safety, about consent, about responsibility, and just about being kind, good people, and letting them know that good people also make really bad decisions, and what it means to take up responsibility, to be able to apologize, sincerely to another person, and to what it means to make amends to another person as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to us, guys. We will be back with another episode next week.
See ya. Hey, if you want to continue this conversation, head over to our Facebook page and be part of the revolution. You can find us at Good Girls Don't Podcast on Facebook. Please note we cannot create change alone. Your support, likes, comments, shares, and iTunes reviews will help us to give a voice to the insanely inspirational women and the controversial issues that we discuss.
If you'd like to be a part of our podcast, or if you have an issue that you have a burning desire for us to bring into the light, please contact us. With fierceness, Ashley
and Verity.
Get ready for the revolution.